Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, December 16, 2025. House Speaker Mike Johnson says there will not be a vote on an amendment to extend expiring Obamacare enhanced premium subsidies as part of a House Republican health care bill this week, and some moderate Republicans are not happy about it. Labor Department releases a jobs report that was delayed due to the federal government shutdown. It shows 105,000 jobs lost in October. Then in November, 64,000 jobs gained, and the unemployment rate rising to 4.6%. Vice President JD Vance talks about the economy at a factory near Allentown, Pennsylvania. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tells senators and House members in closed briefings the Pentagon will not release the full video of the second strike against an alleged illegal drug-carrying boat in the Caribbean in September that reportedly killed survivors of the first strike due to its classified and top-secret nature. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also took part in the briefings. FAA Administrator Brian Bedford says to a House Aviation Subcommittee the FAA was not consulted before provision was included in the House-passed Defense Authorization Bill about military helicopter flights near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport that some members and the NTSB chair say will decrease safety. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, in an interview with Vanity Fair, says President Trump has an alcoholic's personality and Vice President JD Vance is a conspiracy theorist. We will get White House reaction. And a statue of a civil rights leader, Barbara Rose Johns, replaces a statue of a Confederate General, Robert E. Lee, in representing Virginia in the U.S. Capitol's Statuary Hall collection. NBC News writes it's official. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he won't call a vote to extend enhanced subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, effectively guaranteeing they will expire at the end of this month. That means higher insurance premiums will go into effect for millions of Americans who get coverage through Obamacare next year. The Speaker made the announcement Tuesday after a closed-door Republican caucus meeting, saying that leadership failed to reach a deal with centrist members to bring up an ACA amendment on a health care bill set for a vote on Wednesday. That was from NBC News. One of the moderates, Mike Lawler of New York, telling reporters as he left the closed-door House Republican meeting this morning, according to many reports, "I am pissed for the American people. This is absolute BS." He did say the word. He also went on, "I think it's idiotic not to have an up-and-down vote on this issue. It is political malpractice." He also said everything is on the table about signing a discharge petition from the House Democrats on their preference of a 3-year extension of the ACA subsidies. House Speaker Mike Johnson was asked about all this at a House Republican leadership news conference.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. This morning, Congressman Mike Lawler said that it was political malpractice to not allow a vote on the ACA subsidy extension this week. What's your reaction to that? And will Republicans suffer any political blowback for not allowing something like that to come to the moderates?
Well, Mike Lawler is a very dear friend and a close colleague of mine. And ironically, weekend before last, I was in New York in his district on Long Island, and we were campaigning together, ensuring that he gets reelected. Mike Lawler fights hard for New York, as every Republican in this conference does for their districts. The districts are different. They have different priorities and ideas, but we do have, there's about a dozen members in the conference that are in these swing districts who are fighting hard to make sure that they reduce costs for all of their constituents. And many of them did want to vote on this Obamacare, COVID era subsidy the Democrats created. We looked for a way to try to allow for that pressure release valve, and it just was not to be. We worked on it all the way through the weekend, in fact, and in the end, there was not an agreement, wasn't made. Now, everybody was at the table in good faith, and I certainly appreciate the views and the opinions of every member of this conference. But I will tell you one thing they will all join in unity on is voting for this bill that we've been discussing this morning, because, again, instead of just trying to assist 7% of Americans, this is for 100% of Americans, and we can handle that and do that together. I hope that Democrats will come along with us. If they're serious about solving the problem and bringing down cost of health care, they'll all fully support it as well. But I think you're going to see they're playing politics with this.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference with other House Republican leaders. And shortly after, Congressman Lawler spoke on the House floor, criticizing not only Speaker Johnson, but also House Democratic leadership for not supporting discharge petitions on bills that would both extend the ACA premium subsidies and put in place reforms like cracking down on fraud.
For 43 days, the Democrats shut down the government. And they said it was over the issue of the ACA premium tax credits. I went and confronted Leader Jeffries, and I asked him to sign on to a one-year extension. He refused. When the government finally opened, I and a number of my Republican and Democratic colleagues sat down in good faith to negotiate an extension of the ACA premium tax credits with reforms, because we recognize that this system as designed is not working, that Obamacare is not actually reducing health care costs in America. And in fact, since it took effect, health care premiums have risen by 96%. But we understood that to allow the premium tax credits to expire would hurt the American people. And so we sat down and negotiated, and we came up with several plans and compromises along the way to ensure not only that there was an extension, but that we did eliminate fraud, that we did hold the insurance companies accountable, that we did actually start to reduce cost. We have put those bills forward on the floor in 2 separate discharge petitions. 11 Republicans have signed on to those discharge petitions. Now, why is that necessary? Because House Republican leadership will not allow a vote. It is idiotic and shameful. And so we have been forced to sign on to 2 discharge petitions, and yet my Democratic colleagues will not join us, but for those that were at the negotiation table. The Democratic leader will not release his members to sign those 2 discharge petitions. Why? Because he doesn't actually want to solve the problem. He wants the issue. He wants the issue, which is precisely why Senator Schumer put a 3-year clean extension on the Senate floor that was doomed to fail because it doesn't have bipartisan compromise. This place is disgraceful. Everybody wants the upper hand. Everybody wants the political advantage. They don't actually want to do the damn work. This problem could be solved today if everybody who says they care about extending this signs the discharge. It could be solved today. And we could say to leadership on both sides, a pox on both your houses, both of you are failing this country, both of you are failing this institution, and move the bill forward. So the challenge I have for every one of my colleagues is put the party crap aside and sign the damn discharge today.
Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, on the House floor. House Democratic leaders held a news conference after their morning private meeting, and Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California and Vice Chair Ted Lieu, also of California, were asked about the expiring ACA premium subsidies and the various proposals to extend them with and without reforms.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. 2 of the Republicans who theoretically could be the folks that would sign on to your all's discharge petition, Representative Kiley and Representative Bacon in the last 12 hours have told me, look, we don't believe that Democrats actually want a solution. They think that Democrats just want to run in 2026 on the health care issue. What's your response to that?
Completely false. I mean, that could be what they tell themselves to put themselves to sleep at night. But that's not reality. Look, our core focus and our goal, we've been the ones who have been talking about this. During the government shutdown, when we're all here, we have been the party, we have been the people who have been saying the American people are getting left behind. You help billionaires and wealthy corporations at the expense of people, and that needs to change. We have to fix that. This deadline is coming on 12/31. Join with us. Where was the Bacon and Kiley amendment to the big ugly bill? Oh, they signed a letter or something like that telling the president not to cut these things. Big deal. Like, they sign letters all day long to absolve themselves of, cutting people's health care. Meet with us, work with us come to the table and bring your ideas. But more importantly, don't just bring your ideas, bring your ability to tell your leadership no. And it shouldn't take somebody who's walking out the door and has one foot out the door to speak up against the president and their own party when it comes to health care. If there's serious folks on the other side of the aisle, and you can probably count them on two hands, then we're willing to engage with them.
The Democratic solution is very simple: extend the ACA tax credits. That is the solution. There's 214 signatures on a discharge petition. And let me just talk about what the Republicans have done. Nothing, right? They knew that these tax credits were expiring at the end of this year. What they would normally do, if you actually want a solution, you might actually have held hearings. You might actually have had folks testify. You might have actually tried to put together a plan. That's not what they did. They did nothing. And then last week, the speaker behind closed doors just randomly puts together a healthcare plan that he just is going to drop with no hearings, no witnesses testifying. That's why it's going to fail. They were never serious about doing this. As the chair said, the easiest solution is to just sign the discharge petition to extend the ACA tax credits.
Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat of California, the vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus, joining the caucus chair, Pete Aguilar, also of California, at a news conference. And the House Rules Committee met today to consider that House Republican health care bill that Ted Lieu mentioned to set the rules for House floor debate expected on Wednesday. The bill is titled Lower Health Care Premiums for All Americans Act and would, according to an article at The Hill, appropriate funds to pay for cost-sharing reductions in Obamacare, a complicated move that will lower premiums for some people but decrease the overall amount of subsidies and make premiums more expensive for others. Such a provision was stripped from the One Big Beautiful Bill over the summer because it violated Senate rules. Also expand association health plans, include provisions to make the PBM industry more transparent, and the bill will not include an extension of health savings accounts that have been floated in several other Republican health care plans, part of the reporting from The Hill. The Rules Committee leaders spoke at the start of the meeting today. Here is Virginia Fox, Republican of North Carolina, the chair.
The Lower Health Care Premiums for All Americans Act would lower health care premiums, increase health care access, expand choice in health care, and bring about greater transparency to the healthcare system in the United States. The Unaffordable Care Act decimated America's healthcare system and made lofty promises to the American people that were never fulfilled, not by a long shot. Premiums have been skyrocketing for years. The entire system has been rotting from the inside out, and the American people have been left with preset options that are as inefficient as they are unaffordable. This legislation mandates overdue transparency from pharmacy benefit managers to employers, provides necessary funding for cost-sharing reduction payments, and improves options for American workers through association health plans, preserving the integrity of self-insurance, and choice arrangements. As we've always done, Republicans are offering an alternative to the broken healthcare system that Democrats created and have been propping up for over a decade. Unlike those who manufactured the Unaffordable Care Act, Republicans are offering a clear, responsible, and straightforward solution so that all Americans have access to health care that is affordable and meets their needs. It's time that we restore integrity, functionality, and choice to our health care system.
Congresswoman Virginia Fox, Republican from North Carolina, chair of the Rules Committee, at the start of today's committee meeting to consider that Republican-drafted health care bill. The Rules Committee will set the rules for floor debate. And if they do report a rule, it could be debated and voted on, the rule first, and the bill on Wednesday. Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat from Connecticut, is the ranking member of the Rules Committee. He also spoke at the start of the meeting.
Democrats have been trying for months to avert this crisis. Governors warned you, state officials warned you, and Americans, even Republican voters in your own districts, have been very clear. Don't let these tax credits expire. Since Democrats enhanced the ACA tax credits in 2020, enrollment has more than doubled from 11.4 million to 24.3 million Americans. 88% of that growth happened in states that Donald Trump won. And now, through inaction, you are betraying your own constituents and voting to hurt the very people who voted for you. Open enrollment deadlines have already passed. Families have already sat down, looked at the numbers, and made impossible choices. Many decided to go without coverage in 2026 because they can't afford it, especially with Trump's tariffs driving up the cost of everything else. Speaker Johnson has decided to turn his back on working people, and in doing so, he has ensured that millions will lose their health care in the new year.
Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat from Connecticut, Rules Committee ranking member. Again, it's this committee that decides the rules for House floor debate on the Republican health care bill, and that includes how much time debate there'll be and also what amendments can be offered. This is Washington Today. From the Washington Post, the economy is flashing new warning signs as the U.S. labor market shed jobs over October and November, and the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.6%, the highest level since 2021. Job gains of 64,000 in November exceeded expectations, but only partially offset the loss of 105,000 jobs in October. Those losses, the sharpest since the COVID pandemic-era recession, reflected the exit of tens of thousands of federal workers who took a deferred resignation package earlier this year. That was from the Washington Post. The jobs report delayed until today because of the federal government shutdown. Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, spoke to reporters about the jobs report today in the White House driveway.
How concerned are you the unemployment rate keeps rising?
Well, the other thing that rose was labor force participation. And I think that right now, I think for those two things to happen, probably what's going on is the 250,000 federal government workers who took the buyout are staying in the labor force and looking for work. And so we saw a big reduction, about 250,000 in federal employment. We saw an uptick in the unemployment rate, but we also saw an uptick a few months in a row of labor force participation. So I think those government workers are out there looking for jobs. And there's an academic literature that suggests that they'll be very successful at it because government workers tend to be very well qualified when they hit the private sector.
So not worried? Do you think it'll come down?
Excuse me?
You're not worried then about the unemployment
Oh, I think it should come down, yeah, as they're searching for new jobs. Yeah.
Given the delay in all of these labor numbers, how much stock should we put in any of them? I mean, is this a realistic look at what the economy is right now?
We need to get a BLS commissioner that revisits how the data are calculated. That there's a big difference over time between the household survey and the payroll survey. They should be about the same. If you ask households, do you have a job, and then you add them up. But if you ask firms, are you giving jobs to people, and you add them up, they should be about the same number. And during the Biden administration, they diverged by more than 2 million people over that time. And so, these are the best numbers we have. They're the ones we have to go on, but we also should look at everything else that we're seeing. And so for me, one of the things that I think is strongest, we're very good at measuring output and income. And GDP right now is a little bit below 4%, second quarter in a row. When output is that high, then normally job growth is really solid. And so it'd be very unusual for job growth not to keep up with GDP in the long run once we see the revisions.
But are these numbers accurate given there was such a delay with the government shutdown and how they were reported?
Yeah, I think that the surveys were done according to their normal procedures.
Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, speaking to reporters in the White House driveway. Well, more on the jobs report in just a minute, but Kevin Hassett was also asked about another issue involving the fact that the president has said he's a finalist to be the next Federal Reserve chair. CNBC writing, there has been some pushback against Hassett in recent days. Sources told CNBC that the president's advisors worry that Hassett will be perceived as too close to Trump and will do his bidding rather than seek to set interest rates in line with the Fed's dual mandate of stable prices and full employment. That was from the CNBC article. Back to Kevin Hassett.
Being close to the president is one thing, but if you were to serve in that position, can you reassure the American people that you would make decisions independent of what the president asks of you?
Yeah, the job of the Federal Reserve Chair is to run the Federal Reserve independently. It's also the job of the Federal Reserve to be nonpartisan and to focus on monetary policy. And I think that one of the things that the president's been disappointed in is that the Fed has been quite partisan and, cutting rates right before an election, focusing so much on issues other than monetary policy. And so I think that it's very easy to conceive of someone from inside this building or that building going over there, like Steve Myron is doing right now, and doing a great job of being an independent Fed governor or chair.
When do you think you'll learn the final decision?
The president has said that he'll make his final decision by the end of the year or the beginning of next year.
Where do you think interest rates will go from here? Do you think how much lower do you think they should be?
Well, because we've got such a huge increase in supply, which we're seeing, there's a capital spending boom. We've got groundbreakings for factories all over the country. We've got plans to increase power generation that's unlike anything I've ever seen, like maybe in the next 5 years, getting as much new power online as we've done over the last 20 or 30 years. And so all of that stuff is really positive for what's going to happen for the future for growth.
Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, with reporters in the White House driveway. Returning to the jobs report released today by the Labor Department, Associated Press writing the United States gained a decent 64,000 jobs in November, but lost 105,000 in October as federal workers departed after cutbacks by the Trump administration. The government said in delayed reports the unemployment rate rose to 4.6% last month, highest since 2021. That was from AP. Vice President JD Vance spoke about this and the economy in general in a visit today to Uline Shipping Supplies, Albertus, Pennsylvania, right near Allentown.
The jobs report you mentioned this morning, you said 60,000 jobs were added in November. However, it also said 100,000 jobs were lost in October, and the unemployment rate currently stands at 4.6%, which is the highest since the pandemic. So my question is, how do you inspire companies to hire people if people don't have jobs? Income tax cuts aren't going to help them.
Well, first of all, the idea that income tax cuts don't help is ridiculous. If more people have more money to spend in their pocket, that's good for businesses, it's good for families, it's good for everybody. It's one of the ways why we do this. When we talk about 100,000 jobs, you're talking about government sector jobs, and that is in a lot of ways the entire story of what we're trying to do under President Trump's leadership. We want to fire bureaucrats and hire these great Americans out here. That's what we're trying to do. Now, you mentioned, this is an important point, you mentioned the unemployment rate ticking up to 4.6%. I think this is a very, very important point, because you know what that means? What that data shows, you got to get in the weeds a little bit. The unemployment rate only counts the people who are looking for work. So let's say you dropped out of work 2 years ago, you haven't been searching for a job. Well, you're unemployed, but you're not counted in the official unemployment statistics. What you're seeing as wages go up, as more investment comes into our country, is that people who weren't looking for work under Biden's administration are getting out there and looking for work in the Trump administration. That's exactly what we want. We want to get people off the sidelines and give them a good job with good pay, and we're seeing a lot of evidence that that is happening under President Trump's leadership.
Vice President JD Vance at Uline Shipping Supplies, Albertus, Pennsylvania, near Allentown. He also, with Second Lady Usha Vance, visited Allentown Rescue Mission, a Christian homeless shelter and rehabilitation center for men, where he served turkey and ham. On the jobs report, House Ways and Means Committee Democrats posting on X, almost a year of Republicans in complete control, unemployment at its highest since 2021, nearly no jobs added since April. U.S. manufacturing has been shrinking for 9 months. Households are paying an extra $1,200 for tariffs, layoffs happening in nearly every sector. A post from U.S. House Ways and Means Democrats. Wall Street today, the Dow down 302, NASDAQ up 54, S&P down 16. The House today passed a bill that would increase background and criminal record checks of unaccompanied children, UACs, who enter the U.S. illegally. The bill is named for Kayla Hamilton, a young woman who was sexually assaulted and murdered by a 17-year-old UAC and gang member who was released to a sponsor during the Biden administration. Here's some of the House floor debate. Congressman Russell Fry, Republican from South Carolina, in support of the bill.
Walter Javier Martinez, a 16-year-old Salvadoran national, admitted to authorities that his aunt paid a guide $4,000 to smuggle him into the United States. As is required by law with most UACs, Walter was then transferred to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement at the Department of Health and Human Services. Instead of conducting a basic criminal or gang affiliation check, HHS instead focused on programming and wellness activities while missing clear signs of gang involvement. Despite incomplete information and the sponsor's lack of legal status in the country themselves, HHS approved the placement. Martinez ran away within weeks from his sponsor, becoming one of more than 150,000 UACs in the last administration lost track of. According to his sponsor, months later, Walter left, and I quote, to do what he was doing in his home country, get trouble on the streets and hang out with gang members. The federal government just needed to make a phone call to El Salvador. That's all that would have solved this. Instead, Kayla was brutally murdered because the government failed to vet Walter, a known MS-13 gang member with gang tattoos and a criminal history. The Kayla Hamilton Act will help ensure another murder like Kayla's does not happen.
Congressman Russell Fry, Republican from South Carolina, on the House floor. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington State, spoke against the bill.
Kayla Hamilton's death was a senseless tragedy, and my heart goes out to her family and her loved ones. Every single one of us wants to do anything we can to make sure such a thing doesn't happen again. And I understand the impulse to do just anything to try and prevent this. But responsible governance means working together to create sensible solutions, not weaponizing tragedies to push through political priorities. Under the guise of, quote, preventing child trafficking, this bill would subject unaccompanied kids to abusive practices like invasive bodily searches. It would make it harder to release them from detention, in spite of the protections that Congress established in the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008. That was a bill that was passed by both chambers by unanimous consent. I do wish that we were working on real reforms that are needed, especially as President Trump has set aside long-standing protections for unaccompanied children. Right now, these kids are spending more time in government custody than ever amidst Trump's campaign of mass kidnappings and disappearances.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington State, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 225 to 201. Federal News Network reporting a group of lawmakers found the Pentagon has diverted at least $2 billion intended for barracks repairs, school upgrades for children of service members, and training programs to support the southern border mission. That was from Federal News Network. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said today the Pentagon will not release the full video of the double-tap strike that killed 2 survivors of an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean in September. He said members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee could review the video this week. Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke outside of a closed-door briefing today with senators and House members.
Obviously, we had a classified hearing, so the details of which we can't discuss. It's, I believe, our 22nd or 23rd bipartisan engagement. We'll continue to engage with Congress on this. We're headed to the House now to do a similar briefing and provide updates on this counter-drug mission, which is focused on dismantling the infrastructure of these terrorist organizations that are operating in our hemisphere, undermining the security of Americans, killing Americans, poisoning Americans. And this has been a highly successful mission that's ongoing and continued, and we're pleased to be here today to update Congress on how that's developing and how that's moving forward. As I said, I believe it's our 22nd, 23rd such engagement, certainly been at least the fourth or fifth that I've been involved in, and those will remain and be ongoing.
What is the justification, Secretary? I would just echo that. It is the 22nd bipartisan briefing we've had on a highly successful mission to counter designated terrorist organizations, cartels, bringing weapons meaning drugs, to the American people and poisoning the American people for far too long. So we're proud of what we're doing, able to lay it out very directly to these senators and soon to the House, but it's all classified. We can't talk about it now. We're also going to tomorrow allow the HASC and SASC to see the unedited video of the September 2nd, alongside with Admiral Bradley, who has done a fantastic job, has made all the right calls, and we're glad he'll be there to do it. But in keeping with long-standing Department of War policy, Department of Defense policy, of course we're not going to release a top secret full unedited video of that to the general public. HASC and SASC and appropriate committees will see it, but not the general public.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to reporters on Capitol Hill after briefing the senators, as they said, heading over to the House side to brief them. The National News Desk writing about this: the day before the briefing, U.S. Southern Command said it attacked 3 more alleged drug boats in the Eastern Pacific, killing 8 people. The pressure campaign on Venezuela has destroyed more than 20 boats and killed at least 95 people since it began. The closed-door sessions come as the U.S. is building up warships, flying fighter jets near Venezuelan airspace, and seizing an oil tanker as part of its campaign against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro continues to deny drug trafficking allegations and accuses the administration of trying to overthrow his government. That was from the National News Desk. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke to reporters after the closed briefing.
I reiterated my demand of Secretary Hegseth in front of all 100 senators that he allow every senator to see the unedited version, the unedited video of what happened on September 2nd. He refused. The administration came to this briefing empty-handed. That's the major question that we face. And if they can't be transparent on this, how can you trust their transparency on all the other issues swirling about in the Caribbean? Every senator is entitled to see it. If there is no problem with sources and methods, because the senators will see it in the SCIF. I also believe that every American should see an appropriate version of this, of the unedited, they should see an appropriate version of what happened on September the 2nd. I saw it. It was deeply troubling. In my Gang of 8 meeting last week, I asked Secretary Hegseth, let every senator see it. He said he'd think about it. Today, he came up with no answer and no tape.
So he officially said
His reasoning was that it might give things away that shouldn't be. I respect classification. When you do it in the SCIF, that argument is undercut. It's just with senators in the SCIF.
Can you help us understand if they gave any rationale of what the end goal of these strikes actually is? I imagine
Look,
the question
that's the sad, and I sat through this briefing once before last week. We do not, their policies in the Caribbean are unclear. We don't know what the limits are. We don't know where they'll stop. We don't know what the ultimate goal is. The president says different things at different times and contradicts himself. That's why we need full transparency, at least to the 100 senators, and much more transparency to the American people. We don't want another endless war. We don't want to stumble into something, and given Trump's erratic back and forth on this issue, I worry about that. So do many Americans.
holding another briefing, sir?
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, speaking to reporters outside the classified briefing by the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He referred to the SCIF, that's SCIF, for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican of Oklahoma, also spoke to reporters after the briefing.
Why wasn't this video shown to the senators?
Because, well, it has been made to those with jurisdiction. Not every senator has the same clarification. We all get a TS, but depends on your classification. of the committee that you're in that has jurisdiction over it. Now, every senator can go get read in, and every senator can be asked, but to hold it as a whole because of sensitivity, not of the strike, but of the assets that was used, it's not available to everybody. That's why we have committees of jurisdiction over certain areas.
Isn't that your oversight responsibility to understand
Each committee? Well, not everybody's on Intel, and there's a reason. But not everybody's on Intel. You know that. You've been up here covering that for a long time. You know committees have certain jurisdiction. So the question you're asking is why? They don't have jurisdiction over it.
It's not a jurisdiction question, it's a classification question.
It is a classification issue. Listen, let's talk about the whole big picture here. We do because I'm on the committee that has jurisdiction over it.
Don't have the right.
Not everybody's able to go on the Intel skiff either. You know this. How long you been up here covering this?
Okay, but a full senator briefing.
But this is a full. You asked about the video. I told you about the video. Why it's not being sold. And if you don't like the answer, I can't help that. I don't make the classification.
I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand it.
I told you the classification of it. I'm not trying to be combatant here, guys. This is the classification of it. If you don't like the classification, talk to the White House about it.
Did they talk about what the stated goal is?
Let's talk about the whole picture here as a whole. Guys, I'm losing patience on the whole thing because I think it's ridiculous that we're having this conversation because underneath Obama, he had 500 strikes, 3,700 different individuals were killed. There wasn't a big show about this. What you guys are all upset about is the hemisphere that it's working in. The hemisphere is these are drug terrorist organizations. The same people that Obama went after, some people we've been over for the last 24 years were terrorist organizations that were wanting to kill Americans. There has been more Americans killed because of these terrorist cartels drugging our streets, drugging every one of your all streets, every one of your all's towns, every one of the audience's towns. They've killed more people in 2024 on our streets than we lost in the entire Vietnam War for U.S. personnel. These are terrorist organizations that are poisoning our streets. The president has the authority to do so. The argument is it's too close to our shores. Does anybody doubt that these are terrorist organizations? Does anybody have a question about these being terrorist organizations? So what's the difference between Obama attacking these individuals when they were deemed terrorist organizations in the Middle East versus the ones that are here right now poisoning our streets? That's what the whole conversation is about.
Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican of Oklahoma, with reporters after being briefed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The Guardian writing about the briefings today. The United States has attacked more than 20 vessels in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific Ocean since the beginning of the campaign in early September, killing at least 90 people that Washington alleges were smuggling drugs. In the most recent attack announced Monday, U.S. Southern Command said it had hit 3 vessels and killed 8 individuals. Lawmakers in both the Senate and House Representatives have introduced war powers resolutions intended to stop the president from engaging in hostilities against Venezuela without Congress's permission. Both chambers could vote on the measures this week, but it's unclear if they would have enough Republican support to pass. That was from The Guardian. This is Washington Today. The issue of U.S. military helicopter flights near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport came up early and from both sides of the aisle at today's hearing with FAA Administrator Brian Bedford. It was his first congressional testimony since becoming administrator in July. He was before the House Aviation Subcommittee. He told the chair, Troy Nehls, Republican of Texas, that the FAA learned last week that the controversial Section 373 was in the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, the House had passed. That section would allow the military to operate essentially the same way as it did before last January's deadly mid-air crash with a passenger plane. Here's the exchange between Congressman Nehls and the administrator.
Administrator Bedford, the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, of 2026 includes Section 373, which in my opinion does not improve safety in the D.C. metropolitan airspace and instead maintains similar operational exceptions that existed at the time of the tragic mid-air collision over the Potomac that claimed 67 innocent lives just 11 months ago. And as written, this provision effectively gives the military very broad discretion to operate under concurrent waiver authority without enhanced tracking or broadcast requirements that could prevent mid-air conflicts at the low altitudes. Administrator Bedford, are you familiar with this language? And if you are, do you envision any safety concerns that could arise if it's enacted as currently written?
Well, thank you for the question, Chairman Nehls. I'm told it's FAA policy not to comment on legislation while it's going through the process, and I will try to respect that. I will advise the committee that normally when language like this is discussed, it's customary to reach out to the FAA and ask for a technical consult or some form of technical advisory. I can tell you that did not happen in this case. We learned of Section 373 essentially when everybody else did last week. But let me be clear, regardless of what, let me say this, let me be clear that our intent is not to go back to where we were prior to January the 29th. As long as I'm administrator, and I believe it's true as long as Secretary Duffy is Secretary of Transportation, we are not going to go back into a position of less safe airspace environment. We will monitor the airspace with vigilance and with safety first.
Well, I'll simply put for me, I do not believe that the military should be conducting any classified training missions or check rides up and down the Potomac River in one of the most congested Class B airspaces in the country. I don't agree.
Congressman Troy Nehls, Republican from Texas, Aviation Subcommittee Chair, questioning the Federal Aviation Administration Administrator Brian Bedford at today's hearing. Subcommittee Ranking Member Andre Carson, Democrat of Indiana, also asked the Administrator about helicopters in his very first questions.
Mr. Administrator, after the very terrible mid-air collision this year of a military helicopter and a passenger plane, many of us serving on the subcommittee urged restrictions on military flights around DCA, particularly military training flights at the height of passenger traffic. We strongly warned against helicopters flying dark without transponders. The FAA's implementation of some of these recommendations was a step in the right direction. Thank you. At least until we receive the NTSB report in the coming months. Now, unfortunately, someone in the Senate didn't agree and inserted concerning provisions in the NDAA that passed last week, as you know. Mr. Administrator, will you commit to our committee, sir, that FAA will maintain the stronger safety measures put in place after the crash, sir?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Carson. The accident at Reagan National on January 29th, I think, shook the FAA to its core. Safety is our foundational mission. It's what everybody in the agency is focused on. Every day, on every flight, that's the mission, to complete it safely. There were gaps that we now see. We can look in the rearview mirror and we can see the gaps that existed, things that tragically had to perfectly line up to enable that crash to occur. As rare as it is, the fact that it could happen at all is a hard lesson learned for the agency. Those gaps have been closed, and they will remain closed as long as I'm the administrator.
Yes, sir. Secondly, sir, will you commit to us that you will use your authority to try and close military exemptions and loopholes that could increase the risk for another mid-air collision?
Well, let me elaborate a little bit on that. The military has actually been great partners since the DCA accident. I mean, there's a lot of learning on both sides. And while I think we always strive for more transparency and more collaboration, some of this new muscle memory is a bit unnatural, but I will say that we've had great cooperation from the Pentagon in terms of how we've enabled new restrictions in the Capital Region airspace. So I would anticipate that to continue. We're in the process of renegotiating our memorandum of agreement in terms of how we continue to operate with those restrictions in the Capital Region, and I expect that to continue.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Andre Carson, Democrat from Indiana, ranking member on the Aviation Subcommittee, questioning the FAA Administrator Brian Bedford at today's hearing. Some other news from this hearing is reported by Reuters. The head of the FAA said Tuesday the agency is committing $6 billion by the end of the year on new air traffic control, telecom, infrastructure, and radar surveillance systems that will be deployed by the end of 2028. Congress in June approved $12.5 billion to reform the aging U.S. traffic control system. The administration wants another $19 billion or more to complete the effort. That was from Reuters. C-SPAN covered this hearing. You can find it in its entirety at our video library at cspan.org. Runs almost 2.5 hours. Forbes writes the Trump administration faces a Friday deadline to release its full files on Jeffrey Epstein after years of speculation over what the documents contain, teeing up numerous potential revelations about the financier and his alleged abuse. But it remains to be seen if the government could keep some details about Epstein's high-profile friends under wraps for now. That was the article from Forbes. Some Senate Democrats held a news conference today to highlight the deadline. Here's Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota.
Let's remember what this is all about. This is about exploitation and abuse. These victims deserve justice, they deserve transparency, and they deserve accountability. Example, Danielle Bensky, 17, recruited into Epstein's circle. Her mom had a brain tumor, and Epstein told her he could help her mom, but only if she abided by his demands, including recruiting other girls. He told her, I can use it to help you, or I can make it very difficult for your mother. That horrific crime, one of many, is why the House voted 427-1 to release the files and why the Senate unanimously passed the bill on Senator Schumer's motion. That bill set a specific deadline, December 19th, and it is a must. It's not a may, it's a must. And it says that no record shall be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. With this deadline, they will show whether they are really going to stop covering up or they're going to protect these powerful abusers. If they redact these files heavily, it will be clear they're hiding something. Because maybe it's because Donald Trump is mentioned 1,500 times. Maybe it's because they want to shield wealthy donors who are implicated in these files. Regardless of the reason, if these files are heavily redacted without justification, Americans will know that they are once again, this administration, siding with the rich and the powerful. Remember, if the president was actually serious about truth and transparency, his administration would have released these files months ago. All the way back in March, the Attorney General said everything is going to come out to the public. The public has a right to know. It's been 9 months. 9 months. And if the administration withholds or heavily redacts these records, it will be clear whose side they are on. We know the money, follow the money. They haven't released those yet. And then when it comes to this, they literally have the power of the entire Congress telling them, get them out there now. That's what these next few days will tell us.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat from Minnesota, at a news conference on Capitol Hill with other Senate Democrats. New York Times writing about President Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, doing an interview with Vanity Fair. She tried to get him to end his score settling against political enemies after 90 days in office, but acknowledged that the administration's still ongoing push for prosecutions has been fueled in part by the president's desire for retribution. She said Mr. Trump has an alcoholic's personality. Vice President JD Vance has been a conspiracy theorist for a decade, and his conversion from Trump critic to ally was based not on principle, but was sort of political because he was running for Senate. Elon Musk is an avowed ketamine user and an odd duck whose actions were not always rational and left her aghast. Russell T. Vogt, the budget director, is a right-wing absolute zealot, and Attorney General Pam Bondi completely whiffed in handling the Epstein files. That's some of the reporting from the New York Times. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked today by reporters in the White House driveway about the Susie Wiles interview. She also talks about the president's announcement via a Truth Social post that he will be giving an address to the nation Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Caroline, does the White House view Vanity Fair's article on Susie Wiles as a hit piece?
I'll say a couple of things on that. First of all, as you all saw on Truth Social, President Trump is going to be giving a joint address an address to the nation, not a joint address, an address to the nation tomorrow night, live from the White House here, 9 o'clock Eastern. I know you guys will all be tuning in. It's going to be a really good speech. I was just in the Oval Office with the president discussing it. He's going to talk a lot about the accomplishments over the past 11 months, all that he's done to bring our country back to greatness, and all he continues to plan to do to continue delivering for the American people over the next 3 years. As for the Vanity Fair article, Michael, I'll take your question directly. This is, unfortunately, another example of disingenuous reporting, where you have a reporter who took the chief of staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within. And then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present. And we see a lot of this when dealing with the media every day. You will leave out important context, leave out comments and facts. You know, many people in this building spoke with that reporter, and those comments were never included in the story, probably because it didn't push this false narrative of chaos and confusion that the reporter was clearly trying to push. So what I'll say about our chief of staff, as you've seen from not just myself, but also the entire cabinet, in a groundswell of support from people on Capitol Hill who don't even work in this building, about how incredible Susie Wiles has been to President Trump. And he's been able to accomplish so much because of his leadership and his tenacity, but also because of Chief of Staff Wiles's leadership and her ability to effectuate his agenda. So thank you.
Can you say a little bit more about the policy changes?
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt with reporters in the White House driveway, and Susie Wiles writing on X. The article published early this morning is a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. Significant context was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team. The truth is, the Trump White House has already accomplished more in 11 months than any other president has accomplished in 8 years, and that is due to the unmatched leadership and vision of President Trump, for whom I have been honored to work for the better part of a decade. None of this will stop our relentless pursuit of making America great again. That post by the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. And Vice President JD Vance was asked by a reporter today about Susie Wiles' take on him in the Vanity Fair article. JD Vance was at an event near Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Mr. Vice President, Jacob Bogage from the Washington Post. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Same to you.
Unfortunately, I have to ask a bit of an off-topic question from affordability because news events do intervene, and that is the interviews that White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles gave to Vanity Fair, in which she's quoted as referring to you as, excuse me, and again, not my words, sir, but a conspiracy theorist of a decade, and described your transformation from someone who once opposed President Trump to now his vice president as an act of political expediency. And I'd like to give you the chance to respond to that, sir.
Well, first of all, if Susie, I'll trust what you said. I haven't looked at the article. I of course have heard about it, but conspiracy theorist. Sometimes I am a conspiracy theorist, but I only believe in the conspiracy theories that are true.
Yeah.
And by the way, Susie and I have joked in private and in public about that for a long time. For example, I believed in the crazy conspiracy theory back in 2020 that it was stupid to mask 3-year-olds at the height of the COVID pandemic, that we should actually let them develop some language skills. You know, I believed in this crazy conspiracy theory that the media and the government were covering up the fact that Joe Biden was clearly unable to do the job. And I believed in the conspiracy theory that Joe Biden was trying to throw his political opponents in jail rather than win an argument against his political opponents. So, at least on some of these conspiracy theories, it turns out that a conspiracy theory is just something that was true 6 months before the media admitted it. And that's my understanding. Now, look, I do want to say something about Susie, though, because, again, having not read this article, Susie is a person I've come to know very, very well. And, you know, a lot of you probably ask yourself, what is it like behind the scenes? What's going on actually behind the scenes of the Trump administration? And I'll tell you, the president is exactly in private who he is in public. Like, I'll tell you a little story. Maybe a week or so ago, I walk into the Oval Office and Marco and I are sitting there talking with the president about something. He says, stop. And he looks at our shoes and says, you guys have terrible shoes. So he goes and gets a shoe catalog. Now remember, this is the Christmas season, so the president's got some holiday cheer. He goes and gets a shoe catalog and gets his favorite shoes and orders like 4 pairs of shoes for me and 4 pairs of shoes for Marco, because he's like, you know, we need our vice president, our secretary of state to look their very best. And, you know, then we went back to talking about whatever major, you know, international issue we were talking about. Again, he is exactly in private who he is in public. That's not true of most people in Washington, D.C. It's not. And I've seen so many people who will say one thing to the president's face, Democrats and Republicans, and then will do the exact opposite behind the scenes. You know why I really, you know what they are, and you know why I really love Susie Wiles? Because Susie is who she is in the president's presence. She's the same exact person when the president isn't around. I've never seen Susie Wiles say something to the president and then go and counteract him or subvert his will behind the scenes. And that's what you want in a staffer. Because as much as I love Susie, the American people didn't elect any staffer. They elected the President of the United States. And what you want, in a staffer is a person who understands they are there to effectuate the will of the American people, and they're there to follow the orders of the duly elected Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And Susie Wiles, we have our disagreements. We agree on much more than we disagree, but I've never seen her be disloyal to the President of the United States, and that makes her the best White House Chief of Staff that I think the President could ask for. And the last thing I'll say is if any of us have learned a lesson from that Vanity Fair article, I hope that the lesson is we should be giving fewer interviews to mainstream media outlets. So,
Vice President JD Vance answering a reporter's question after giving a speech at a shipping company near Allentown, Pennsylvania. Also from the Washington Post, the symbolism will be hard to miss. In the halls of the U.S. Capitol on Tuesday, the statue of a black teenager who fought against segregation will replace a Confederate general who fought to preserve slavery. Barbara Rose Johns was only 16 when she led a walkout in 1951 to protest horrendous conditions at her segregated high school for black students in rural Farmville, Virginia. Students complained to the NAACP, and their case went all the way to the Supreme Court, part of the set of cases known as Brown v. Board of Education that struck down segregation. Tuesday afternoon, Virginia officials will unveil a statue of Johns at the Capitol to replace one of Confederate General Robert E. Lee that had stood for more than a century. That was from the Washington Post. And the ceremony took place in Emancipation Hall. The speakers included House Speaker Mike Johnson and the Democratic leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries. Also, Governor Glenn Youngkin, Republican of Virginia, Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat of Virginia, and family members. Here is Joan Johns Cobbs, the sister of Barbara Rose Johns.
On April 23, 1951, at the age of 16, Barbara Rose Johns led 450 students out of Robert R. Moton High School in Farmville, Virginia, on a strike for a better school. Her courageous and fearless actions that day became part of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, and ultimately helped to change the course of history in the nation when, in 1954, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that segregation was unconstitutional and that separate but equal was inherently unequal. Barbara died September 25th, 1991, and left a journal of her thoughts, and I quote an excerpt from it. Quote, "And then there were times I just prayed, God, please grant us a new school. Please let us have a warm place to stay where we won't have to keep our coats on all day to stay warm. God, please help us. We are your children too." When I think about Barbara, a chapter in the Bible comes to mind. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 6. "The wolf shall also dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them." Thank you all for coming, and may God bless each and every one of you.
Joan Johns Cobb, the sister of Barbara Rose Johns, at the statue unveiling in Emancipation Hall in the U.S. Capitol building today. Each state is represented in the Statuary Hall collection by two statues, and periodically one is replaced. In this case, Confederate General Robert E. Lee is being replaced. The other statue representing Virginia, which will stay, George Washington. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Before we go, reminder, there are now more ways than ever to follow C-SPAN, including on YouTube TV and Hulu Plus Live TV. Current and new subscribers now have access to C-SPAN, C-SPAN 2, and C-SPAN 3. Have a good night.